Hi, Scarlett. It's a pleasure to have you here. How are you today?
I'm great, Michelle. Thank you so much for having me.
First of all, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have the possibility to have this conversation. I wanted to let you have a couple of minutes to give us your background and a short introduction, and then we can just jump directly into it.
Sure. The idea of a short introduction is always hard, right? How do you encapsulate a career in an intro? But I'd say
Oh, you
long
can have a long one. It's not a problem.
we'll be here for 3 hours. No, I'm kidding. But I'm sitting on a couch, so I'm having my therapy session here. But uh, I am Scarlett Sieber. I am the Chief Strategy and Growth Officer at Money 2020. What that really means is that I run the product globally for Money 2020. So
Mm.
our content, creative, marketing, PR as part of that. Product teams, strategy teams sit within my world, and we think about what we're doing globally. And I got here as an ex-banker, ex-entrepreneur.
Mm.
So I've seen a few different angles here getting to this moment.
Nice. That's very interesting. That's one of the most interesting, background that usually founders share, having a little bit of finance experience, a little bit of founder experience and everything else. So, but I was missing, to be honest, the event experience side. So that's very interesting to analyze. So, but let's start talking about Money 2020. I mean, it's one of the most interesting, if not the most interesting, fintech events on the ecosystem globally, I would say, starting from Amsterdam to Vegas and everything. So, can you tell me a little bit how did you land there, first of all? Because coming from financial and arriving at an event like that is kind of particular,
Yeah.
and then of course your experience with that.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because you mentioned that, it's quite common that founders, and I know you have a lot of chat with founders,
Mm.
have the background maybe a bit in financial services or whatnot. I actually took the opposite path where I started as an entrepreneur turned banker. So people were like,
Mm.
"What the heck are you doing?" But that leads into the question that you just asked about landing and being here at Money 2020 now for the last 4 years. So essentially, on my journey, the thing about Money 2020 is I've seen this product, our event, our
Mhm.
shows from every angle. So I've been a speaker, I've been a sponsor, I've been an
Mhm.
attendee, I've been a track chair, and then obviously in this role now. So if you rewind the clock back to 2019, I was just leaving my last banking role as a exec on one of the big banks, and I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. And there was
Mhm.
kind of like two paths that I was looking at. And one of them was Money 2020, to your comment on events. And I didn't really see how is this an obvious path for me because
Mhm.
I love fintech. I love Money 2020. That brand is such a special brand, but how does that work in terms of like Scarlett's vision of what that the future looks like? And then the other path was joining and doing consulting for banks. So all of this
Mhm.
innovation and digital strategy at scale across, numerous banks. So I was pursuing both paths and the interviews for both paths. And then I stayed really close with the Money 2020 team, in particular, Tracy Davies, who is our president. And I just said, this isn't quite right. And here's what I'm looking at. And here's this opportunity. She said, well, how do we make this work? So Money 2020 became my first client. I chose the
Mhm.
consulting path. Money 2020 became my first client. So I ran the main stage for the Las Vegas event back in 19, and also spent a lot of time helping some strategy stuff with Tracy. And then if you fast forward, then COVID happened. Then you fast forward. So imagine, as you said, the event piece. COVID is not great
Yeah.
for events. Um, and then come to 2021, Tracy and I started having some chats again, and she was looking for this role to lead product globally. And she was like, "I've been interviewing a lot of people. How are you thinking about this? What am I not? What am I missing? Because I'm not getting the exact right person." So I went and I
Mhm.
basically rewrote the job description for her a little bit. I put in a bunch of questions of what I would ask, and then I kept thinking about it. I was like, "This needs to be me. Like this should be me." So we had that chat, and 4 years later, here we are. I've been in this role
No,
now for 4 years.
well, I have like 1,000 questions about that. The first one would be, how do you actually do product for an event? I mean, I come from a product background. I've been
Yeah.
doing product manager and product owner multiple times. Doing product for a digital product or for a service is kind of, I wouldn't call it easier, but it's kind of the standard. How do you do that for an event?
It's a great question, and it's actually why my title isn't product, because that was the original one, and why the title got to Chief Strategy and Growth. Now, people
Mm,
think of growth as revenue, which is true, and obviously I'm KPI'd on the same things to grow this business, and roughly 100 million revenue business globally. But the real thing is actually the product is the event, right? So there's a few things. If you think about the base of Money 2020, it is the moment. So the stages, the
mm,
platform that is Money 2020. How do we elevate that? How do we have best in class speakers, which we've always had, but make that even better? We talk about being like the place where we shape the future of the industry. And so that is like now more than ever the focus, right? So we really kind of take that to the next level, having the biggest announcements happen and everything else. But then it's also the experience part. So
mm.
when you go to the show, when you walk through the show, I as we talked about, I've seen it from every angle. There's a certain feeling that you get, and I want it to feel like an amazing experience. Yes, you're getting business done unlike anywhere else because of the caliber and quality of the people, but you're also having fun and you're enjoying your time. And there's a really like
Yeah.
emotive human element to it. That's what I think about when I think about with product. Now, obviously, over time, as we've grown and as we've scaled, there are still the events. So we've talked about the Vegas one a bit, obviously about the Europe one. We also have an Asia show. So that's also a product. We're launching a new product, as in another
Mhm.
event. So all the things that encompass that. But then there are other ones. So you talked about digital products as well. Things like we just announced in Vegas in October that we're launching awards. So that is a
Mm.
digital product. And so being the owner of that and making sure that like essentially the heart of Money 2020 and that magic that can't necessarily be replaced. What is that? Why is that? And how do we make it even better as we move forward?
That's absolutely interesting. It's not also easy to do, to sell something like an event as a product is kind of hard. The word things is actually a very good idea. I think that is something that has become a trend over time. We are seeing many different kind of organization and events trying to do that. Not every one of them is maybe successful, to be honest. But
Yeah,
coming with a big brand behind you like Money 2020 kind of give you the credibility on the market itself. Uh, Maybe talking about the market, how do you think that something like that impacted the fintech market over time? Because I think that during the 2019 until 2022, with COVID, with the downturn, and with everything that we have been through, uh, that was one of the only spot left where people can actually feel the vibe about this kind of environment. So how do you actually think it kind of changed that?
totally. I want to can I answer that question, but I just want to make one more
Sure.
comment on the awards because, and we'll go back to that one in a second because you're 100% right. There are a lot of people who are doing this. It's interesting because Money 2020's, you might not know this part, but Money 2020's sister brand is Cannes Lions, which actually
Mm.
started off as, it is the premier award benchmark in marketing and
Mhm.
advertising. And that actually started off first as an award and built into an event and to a festival, essentially. And that happened over
Mm.
70 years. So the idea of us doing events is not us doing awards is not necessarily a new concept, and we've been thinking about it for years. So why now? There's a lot of reasons because it is about the power of the brand behind Money 2020, but it is about the expertise of our larger company knowing how to do this well and the impartiality around it, and like the fact
Mhm.
that this isn't Money 2020 saying that Michelle is the best podcast, which
Mhm.
that could be my opinion, right? But it is about the industry saying that. So that is a
Mhm.
really important piece. And having those core pillars, we spent literally almost a year now creating those right categories. So we have 5 categories. All this is coming out in short order. We're going to announce it to the world on April 2nd. But we spent a year because one of the things that we have too, back to the product piece, is the content team and other aspects of the team are from fintech. We talked about
Mhm.
who loves your podcast and loves your influence and the things that you talk about. They are all ex-journalists, analysts,
Mhm.
VCs, bankers, fintech operators. And the reason why that's important is when we think about things like this of, yes, the industry is the one who is deciding who are the winners, but we are responsible for making sure that we're putting together the right categories and focusing on the right things. But then we do that and we have a very strong team with a really strong sense of what is right, but then we also validate it with the industry as well. So we've had over 100 conversations with our customers and people who come to our shows and spend time with us to say what is missing, is this right, challenges here, how do we make that work?
Mhm.
So anyways, there are a lot of awards for sure.
Mhm.
I feel very strongly, and yes, this one is my baby, so I'm obviously a bit biased, but
You feel it, basically.
this is going to be next level, and it's going to be
Mhm.
incredible. On your conversation, on your comment around kind of the evolution and where the space has gone with COVID and everything else, I think a few things. Obviously, for us as an event, COVID was a challenge. Our
Mhm.
revenue comes from events, but it also allowed us to take a step back, which is actually how all the things that we're talking about now, the product and all that, came to fruition because we knew that we needed to double down and really reinvest back into the brand of Money 2020 and grow from here. One of the things that we've seen with fintech and more broadly was that fintech is complicated, all right? It's not one
Mhm.
thing. And also the reason why you're able to have large shows across multiple geos is while there are certain topics that are continuous and the same, like talking about open banking in Europe versus the US versus Asia versus
Yeah,
the Middle East, it's all open banking, but where we are is light years apart.
totally different things. Yeah.
So that's where some of this stuff really comes in. And then for us, back to it being a complex ecosystem, also, the power of a platform like Money 2020 is bringing the collective ecosystem together as business gets done at pace. There's a lot of B2B, a lot of B2C. B2B sales cycles are long, especially when you're getting into
Mhm.
financial services. You can
Yeah.
have some short ones, but in general, you're talking 18, 24 months, right? So there's a lot of different people, stakeholders involved, but they all come to the same place at the same time. So you could be having in one day a conversation with a customer, a conversation with a partner, a conversation with, a talent that you want to hire, a conversation with an investor, all at the same time. And I think that is back to like what's happened over the last 5, 6 years, the power of in person. There are a handful of technologies and services that look pretty similar. What really
Mhm.
differentiates at the end of the day, we're all people, and being able to do that and have those conversations in person with the right people really changes the needle. So that's what we've
Yeah.
seen.
No, I agree. I think that the on-person side of this kind of events is like critical to the world success of it. I mean, there was a period of time during COVID where a lot of events like this one try to do that online, trying to do that virtually because they needed to be alive basically in one way or another.
Yeah.
But not all of them were able to do that because you miss that kind of touch being in person and having the kind of network in person, the conversation and everything else. So I think that is kind of critical for the environment itself. Maybe one question here that I was always curious about. How was the kind of shift between an event that started basically in Europe and the kind of move to other markets, like the differences between having this kind of events in Amsterdam or in Vegas or in Asia in the future? So how do you actually make the kind of shift? Because it's not easy for startup, it's not easy for product. For events, it could be actually a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. So we started in Vegas 12
Hmm.
years ago. Well, in the US, let's just say 12 years ago, then shifted into Europe.
Hmm.
We're going into the 10th year into 2026. And then obviously we just talked about Asia, which we had our launch show in 2024. We're coming back year two. Um,
Hmm.
Actually, just like you said, for a startup, it's very similar. So parts of it goes back to like, what is it that is the core USP of your brand? And where is the right market that has the largest amount of demand. So we always spend
Hmm.
time thinking about growth and expansion. And it's very common for events to just go do what they call it geo-cloning. So they go and take the
Hmm.
exact same thing in a different geography. Um, it doesn't always work out. And I think
Yeah.
that for us, there has to be the right, like when you think about the product of Money 2020, it is a particular type of product with a very senior audience, a senior, a steeper ticket price because of the value of the platform. That doesn't
Hmm.
work in every market, right? So
Yeah.
we thought a lot about that. But now with Europe, we've been there, as I said, we're almost 10 years in. First of all, we actually had a different location. At first, we started in Copenhagen and moved to Amsterdam. So part of it is also listening to your customers and what they're telling you and what they need and what they think is right. But we've now, scaled and grown the Europe show to over 8,000 people.
Hmm.
And it is 70% Europe, 30% rest of the world. Our US show, 70% US, 30% rest of the world. So as an example, for that first expansion, there really was the opportunity from a geographic perspective, and there was a demand from Europe. There's a reason why we have 80 plus countries who are coming to the show and it is still European centric. Doesn't mean that the US and Asia and LATAM and Africa aren't coming. They are, but it is Europe first
Hmm.
and Europe focus, which is a really important piece to it.
Yeah.
Same thing now, let's talk about expanding into Asia. Very different market, a lot of
Yeah.
different countries, quite fragmented. So what is our place? How do we differentiate? What does that look like? For us, we focused on Southeast Asia. We feel like from a fintech perspective, that is where we see the most 10, 15
It's
year
the place to be in Asia if you want to sell fintech.
totally and growth. Like that's where the real
Yeah.
opportunities are. There's still a lot of fragmentation, going back to open banking, things like that, cross border. Again, global term, we're looking at it everywhere, but cross border in Asia, real high up there,
Yeah.
because of the amounts to do that. So, but with that one too, like part of it is back to like the secret sauce of Money 2020, but then also adapting and being flexible for that region, because there are different things that happen there. We have to think about the world slightly differently. We built a team in Singapore, in Asia. The show is in Bangkok. But we
Hmm.
built the team in Asia so that they know the market. I have pretty strong opinions about what Money 2020 brand is. Tracy has pretty strong opinions,
Yeah.
but they know the market in a way that we don't. So we leverage the best of both worlds essentially.
Yeah, no, that was one of the curiosity that I had in mind because I've been spending a little bit of time in Southeast Asia. I've lived in Korea for almost 1 year, and I can tell you that the kind of mentality and cultural shift that you have between Europe and the US is not exactly the same of shifting to Asia. So that's kind of jump is going to be crazy for you guys because it's kind of a totally different things. It's selling a different product basically. And I think that having someone in place that actually tell you what is the expectation from the other side, from the startup side, is going to be critical and absolutely important. So I'm
Yeah.
very looking forward to it. I mean, it's going to be very interesting on what is going to be the Money 2020 event in Asia. But yeah, no, coming back to the market itself, not thinking about just Money 2020, but thinking about the market itself. You are coming from this kind of environment. You did a little bit of financial, you have founder experience. How do you actually see the market? Because we are kind of in a very critical phase of the market, I think for many different reasons. We have an ecosystem that is growing and maturing, and at the same time, we have geographical tension all over the place. So, how do you see the market more in general, the startup ecosystem, and more specifically, the fintech ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a really good, really big question.
Yeah.
So naturally, when you think about the market at the most like macroeconomic level, there are some pretty prominent political moments and shifts happening
Mm.
globally. Obviously, here where I am in the U.S., but across the board, and one direct correlation back to fintech is crypto and the pros
Yeah.
and cons, and that I mean that roller coaster continues. We've had some really high, broke over
Yeah.
100, and now we're back down. But I think the point there is that when there is a bit more of market volatility from the history, like I think we take a lesson in history. Market volatility allows for the next wave and level of innovation, right? So if
Yeah.
you think about the financial crisis in 2008, Airbnb, Uber, a lot of those companies started coming up
Mm.
then.
Yeah.
So this is when people take time, stop over the last 12, 18 months, there have been, a lot of public news around layoffs and things like that. And but that is a time when people, the doers, the creators are going to go hunker down, think about what they want to build. And that will be the next big ones on the other side of that. For fintech, um, I spent a lot of time personally talking to the New York Stock Exchange in particular because they're partners of ours. And so I'm always
Mm.
talking to them about how they're seeing the market and what they're thinking about because naturally for them, it's about IPOs, right?
Yeah.
Um, if we rewind the clock, 13, 14 months, there was big conversations about who was going to IPO, and it was kind of like the IPO winter. Everything was a bit frozen. We weren't getting a ton of IPOs. We're hearing a lot more conversations about that coming back. So I think that is a good sense of a healthy market. But
2025 is going to be the year of the liquidity events. We are always saying that.
yeah, we are. But the surprising thing is it's March now, right? But
Hmm.
they're they're happening a bit slower than I think many of us predicted. If I,
I agree.
and we have a lot of conversations. That is again back to us. Like one of the power one of the advantages of our we have a lot of conversations with companies, okay?
Sure.
Because naturally when moments like that happen, they invest in different ways. The long story short is I've been a little surprised about it's a little bit slower than I had expected and anticipated. I still think it's coming, by the way. I still think we will have some of those big moments that you just referenced, but maybe not at the pace and scale as we thought, because there is still a little bit more of a hedging of bets and do we want to stay private for longer? And then even on the funding side too, though, I mean, there's a lot of stats out there on, funding coming back, funding not coming back. You need to kind of like micro analyze the numbers. The reality is a lot of key founders will still get the money. The part that makes me on the human level a bit more cautious and wanting to like dive in is if you are in one of the main markets where a lot of the money is pooled, it's a lot easier. But access to capital when you are not in one of those markets is a bit harder because for the
Yeah.
last 5 years, access to capital was relatively easy. Back to the entrepreneur thing that we started off with, in the last 5 years, not in the last, let's say 2, but let's say the 5 years before that, angel investors that I was talking to, and I did not have a fintech startup, okay? I had a data visualization platform. Angel investors that I was talking to, almost all of them were pinging me because they wanted to start getting into fintech. Like fintech was the hot, sexy thing that
Yeah.
everyone and their mother wanted to be in. So access to capital doesn't mean that was smart, by the way, but access to capital was more easily and readily available for people. That has shifted a bit. So really focusing on the traditional KPIs, truly sustainable growth is important. It's not just, maximum amount of customers, but are they recurring? How much are they coming back? What does the revenue look like? How is the burn? Like that stuff is more valuable and like focus on than it has been in a long time. And I think that that's not a bad thing for the ecosystem.
I strongly agree about the growth overall. I think that as every market cycle, we got a little bit of hype. We got a very great and strong 2020, 2021, maybe also a little bit of 2022. But then reality kick in, and people started to talk about fundamentals again, sustainability, EBITDA. That was a word that I didn't hear for basically 2 years,
Yep.
and that was kind of crazy. Uh, and I think that it's kind of healthy from a certain perspective because you keep back building businesses that are actually making sense instead of just selling the moon.
Yeah.
And you can see the exact same trend in other industry. I mean, AI is going to go through the same exact cycle, at least in my opinion. So it's one of those kind of technology that is built for the long term and for staying here for a huge amount of time. But what people are building on it and the kind of hype is going to jump in a lot and maybe come back to hurt sooner or later. But the technology is there and it's going to be there anyway 5 years from now. So it's kind of the same cycle. You were mentioning partner. I'm very curious about the kind of partner that you are referring to overall, of course. So I strongly believe that you're talking with a lot of startups, and that is absolutely normal. But who are you actually talking to? Who are the main players in this kind of ecosystem and in these kind of events that are contributing to the success of it?
So of course you mentioned startups, right? So just
Yeah.
for numbers, because it's helpful. When you think about the composition of any of the respective shows, so the US being 11,000 plus in 2024,
Hmm.
Europe being 8,000 plus, and Asia being 3,000 plus. This was the
Hmm.
2024 numbers. The thing that has been relatively the same as the percentage of startups, which is roughly 25%, give or take. Um, it is the ecosystem play, right? So it's the banks, 100% the banks. The big
Hmm.
banks, the medium-sized banks, the regional banks, the community banks, let's just say financially chartered institutions, okay? Because credit unions, especially in the US, are a big part of that.
Yeah.
So that is a bucket. Money 2020 started off as a payments conference, and so a lot of payments at the core still is there. So payments is the other huge, huge bucket. And when you think about who our customers, as in anyone who comes to the show wants to interact with, it's those two, but not just exclusively those two. So we have the venture capitalists back to the other side of the 25%. Naturally, VCs are aware of that and want to spend time with them. But I'd say the thing that we've really been building over the last 3-4 years are the regulators and like
Hmm.
adjacent industries coming into financial services. So that has been a strategic priority. And when you start dealing with politics at the most political level, it takes a little bit of time.
Yeah.
But so we've been building it and building it and having some really positive other sides of that. We're going to make a big announcement soon for Europe. We're doing something really cool as it relates to regulation and a bit of a summit there in Europe this year. Uh, Again, in the Asia show, we have over 10 regulators across Southeast
Mm.
Asia coming and spending time. We're going to bring them together in a closed room like we did last year. We had, I think, 6 or 7 last year. So that I'd say is the other piece of it, but it is not any one of them in isolation. It is the collective that makes
Mm.
it so special. But I'd say the extra is the regulation and the regulators that we've been bringing to the table, not only to come to utilize our platform to speak to the industry, the private sector. That's been a really big thing, but also then to speak with each other and to speak with the industry in closed doors as well and have those conversations, because some of that happens in the key cities, but really at scale. So, I mentioned New York Stock Exchange. That is a strategic partnership. We look for opportunities where there are mutually beneficial opportunities for us to come together, and they're just a
Hmm.
great example. So we have some more exciting stuff to come from them in short order.
Yeah, I was expecting banks, to be honest. Regulators is a very interesting topic. I mean, I've been speaking about that with multiple peoples coming from multiple geographies. Uh, and I think that the kind of relationship that fintechs have with regulators right now is kind of tricky, because for a very long period of time, uh, there were a conflicting relationship between the two because startups were seeing regulators as a blockers on what they wanted to do. Maybe right now the kind of relationship is let's say changing a little bit because, for example, mostly in Europe, we are seeing them as enabler most of the time. A
Yeah.
quick example here is the digital banking market. We were able to build some very good and strong digital banks in Europe, like Revolut, N26, Bank, Monzo, and all the others. While if you take a look at the United States, you don't have a real digital banking champions, not huge company like Nubank or Revolut. You have some good digital bank, but not huge one. And I think that the regulation actually played a big role under that point of view because you don't have maybe the structure always to have that kind of entities to grow up. On top, of course, of a very competitive financial market that is always tricky to do. But I
Yeah.
think it's a very interesting aspect, and it's a very good strategy to move on. Having also them at the table is going to open up a lot of doors, mostly for startups.
Totally. It's interesting because back to the banking life. So I worked at actually a European bank, but a very large U.S. presence, BBVA, and we
Mm.
acquired one of the first neobanks before all the ones that you mentioned, which was Simple Bank in Portland.
Mm. Yeah.
And actually, just recently in the last 18 months, give or take, was just announced that that was shut down and absorbed into the bank. But yes, to your point, like regulation, it does play such a crucial role in what is possible and what's not possible, which is why, yes, for the startups, 100%. But like
Mm.
they're sitting there and having two different conversations because the banks feel like at times that startups get the unfair advantage, and so it's like
Mm.
what's nice is having conversations where all of them where it's like, how do we collectively come together? Because back to that point of like, also banks are the enablers a lot of time of startups, and back to like my time not just with BBVA but with a handful of other banks, all the fintechs were talking to us and wanting to go be like talking about, should we be a bank, can we be a bank, and then they realize how, especially in the US but not exclusively, how hard it is to do that, and all the for good reasons to protect the end consumers, whether they be small businesses or end consumers. But a lot of them are like, okay, never mind, let's try to like utilize you as the platform to do that. But a lot of the names that you list on the neobank side have had different stints, let's say, to try to come to the US, and there's a reason why that hasn't worked out, right? And you see like Revolut has a banking license in Mexico. They're talking there's another really great person from Revolut who I can't remember which country now, but another great they have a license in another country. I think it's in Eastern Europe. But in any case, like they've been doing a lot of expansion. They've tried to come to the US a few times. Um so regulation plays a big role in that, I guess is the point.
Yeah,
So
and maybe just to deep dive on this one. So the follow-up question here is, what about crypto? Because that is going to be a great part of that regulation. What's your take on crypto?
So it's a good question. I would say for me, even back to my bank brain and beyond, I've always been fascinated about the underlying technology, right? Which is blockchain. And even 10 years ago, what crypto and this whole world did was starting to allow banks to actually work together. And it's not just about them, obviously. We've seen all the CBDCs and everything around that. Do I believe in the idea of like democratization of financial services? Yes, I do. But
Mm.
responsibly is the part that we are still kind of figuring out. And it's interesting because you'll have a bad player in crypto because there are bad
Mhm.
players, right? And then
You
the
have
whole
bad histories, let's say, bad histories of
yes,
players, but not all of them are bad players.
correct. But you could say the same thing about the banks. Like, dude,
Absolutely, yes.
and
Fair
that's the
point.
point that I think sometimes gets forgotten in the headlines is like, yes, there's something that hasn't maybe gone the way that, we had expected, but I'm very excited about the possibility, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere anytime soon. The question is, how do you take out, the signals from the noise? And, we talked a little bit about the roller coaster of that, where as long as people are educated and empowered, I think there's a huge, huge upside, and I'm
Mhm.
excited about the overall possibility. But we're certainly not there quite yet. As I think we're not as far as people maybe think that we are.
But do you think that, coming also back to the topic that we were discussing about regulators, do you think that mostly in the US, you need the regulators to step in to actually make and fill that gap? Or do you actually think it's just a matter of time of having just good players on the market actually bringing that kind of innovation to the wide public?
Ooh, that's a weighty question. It's a good one. I definitely think the regulators need a seat at the table.
Mm.
Um, for sure. Back to protection, because
Mm.
um, in certain instances, and to your point of the geographic thing, in Europe, it's been regulation first, industry follow, whereas here
Yes.
it's been industry first, regulation follow.
Yeah.
So there is no, in my opinion, I don't think anyone has it quite right, but we need to move more to where they're coming together. But the answer to me is not move the regulators out. Like they're a very
Mm.
important part of this. The problem is they have to, I believe there is a real opportunity for them to get to pace quickly because they want to make sure that they're protecting it, and that's
Yeah.
very important. But we need to allow this to happen more quickly than it is right now. Not just crypto, but all of these type of innovations that we're getting to.
Mm.
We have a real opportunity to take this to the next level, but the regulation needs to be on the journey with us in the US. And then, again, every region has a bit of different. I mean, in Asia, there are some regulators who are definitely on the forefront, but still we've got some
Mm.
work to do there. But I definitely think that they need to be on the journey.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that the kind of differences that define your regulation over geography or different geographies are very interesting. Like I was speaking a while ago with a payment company in Latin America, and they were using a lot of open banking, uh, and they were making a very strong point about the fact that open banking, for example, in Latin America is evolving not based on regulation, but based on the biggest market. Like for example, they had a huge, strong background and framework of open banking rules that were based on Brazil, what Brazil was doing. And they were actually adapting all of those kind of rules to the other countries on Latin America. That is a little bit what the US did in the past, market first, regulation will come. In Europe, we actually do the things exactly the opposite way. And I think that the kind of differences in velocity, make you understand which is the best, let's say, model from a business perspective, at least.
Mm.
But at the same time, there's kind of a little bit of risk there because, doing like that, you will always find someone that will try to take advantage and that will cause some damage. Uh, the real trick behind it, in my opinion, is having a market that is so vibrant and so fast that you are actually able to overcome the damage over time actually quite quickly, and that is very interesting. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that the kind of impact that the event had over the fintech ecosystem was huge, mostly also in the last couple of years. but I wanted to understand, how do you see that in the upcoming years? So we have talked about the new product that are the words, the new market, and everything else. But how do you see the evolution of something that's tricky as an event, as a product on the market, and the evolution on the market itself? So what are you looking forward for the fintech market?
Yeah, I'd say a few things. I was just reflecting on what you said because you said some very good, important points in that. Um, I'm looking forward to how that part evolves, right? Where getting the right
Mhm.
balances of regulation and
Between the
market,
two, yeah.
especially in other geographies. So,
Mhm.
one thing we haven't talked about is, and there's obviously I mean, we've gotten to Latin, we haven't gotten to Africa or the Middle East as an example. Okay, so the Middle East that's another thing that we long story short got acquired by a the largest event company in the world called Informa back
Mhm.
in October, which gives us the ability to have global scale almost instantaneously and like a really amazing way. And one of the things that has happened is we've already launched Money 2020 Middle East, or we announced Money 2020 Middle East happening
Yeah.
in Riyadh in September. And in that case, this is actually done as a JV with the Saudi government through a company called Talaf. But in any case, the reason why I bring that up is back to regulation. So you can imagine somewhere there things get also a bit different. They are thinking about how to, bring a lot more of innovation and tech and everything into the Middle East and into Riyadh and into Saudi in particular. And so something like embedded finance. So, that's been a topic that's come and gone. Wrote a book about it a few years ago because we sat there, my co-founder and I, who actually ironically now lives in Riyadh, but that was by chance.
By
um,
chance.
by chance. So we were sitting there, we were talking about it, and she was reading Grab's investor statement, and it was talking about the revenue from basically fintech and embedded finance superseded the delivery business. And it was just like, okay, there is something here. But anyways, fast forward now, that is like the thing in the Middle East is embedded finance is like everyone embedded finance and all of that is like the number one topic there. So I guess
Mm.
the point is it is the trends, it is things about, of course, embedded finance, AI, da 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 da, da, but really it is the applications of that and the conversation that we just had around the role of regulation in the markets and how they're working together to actually like bolster these ecosystems. Because you were asking about the
Mm.
state of the market and even thinking about fintech funding.
Yeah.
Well, places like LATAM, the way that a lot of them get off the ground first is by the governments. The governments invest
Mm.
in early stage startups, or these companies do that, and then there ends up being a funding gap because once they have a certain amount of scale, then all the money wants to come. But long story short, the government's regulation, all those things play a lot into the economy, into getting these first companies out, investing in them early, and we're seeing what I'm seeing where I sit looking at this globally. There's a lot happening in the Middle East right now, and the regulation is a part of that. And they're talking about licensing and all that other stuff, bank licensing there in other interesting ways. So that's another
Uh,
piece I'm looking at.
I strongly feel the last point, to be honest, because I was talking recently with some investors from the Middle East. What I found very interesting is the kind of mentality shift that they have. Like if you had a conversation with VCs or with investors from the Middle East in 2016 or 2018, they had just one mantra. They wanted to invest in US based companies, in European companies, and so far and so forth. Then there was a huge shift in the market and they didn't want to do that anymore. And the only constraint that they had was, okay, we can invest, we can deploy capital. We want startup to come here and to build something in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Dubai, in all the Middle East. Because they want to build something in their own countries, they want to build their own economy based on digital services, based on innovation, on tech. And I think it's a very good example on how, the regulation that we were talking about, we're trying to drive the innovation in the market itself. Because it's obviously the government saying, okay, we can deploy capital, we can give you capital, but build something here, not just invest in other countries because the return is better. Just build something here. And I think that under certain point of view, it's what, like, for example, Europe should do. And it's trying to do in a certain, very slow way because we need this kind of things, and we need people to build here, and not just to go to the US because it's the best, capital market in the world. Uh, you need to have someone in place. But I think that what will come out from Saudi in the coming years will be very interesting. We already saw a couple of very good example with fintech startups being very well funded there and building, on a global scale. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see the events, shift to Saudi in September. And that's going to be very, very interesting. Also to see the cultural change, the cultural differences between Europe, the US, the upcoming Asia, and everything. How do you see that actually? Because you're already organizing that, I believe, so you can already see the kind of changes that you have.
Totally. So we did have Tahaluf, which is the joint venture that
Mm-hmm.
we have, did host a fintech event in Riyadh last year, so they have a
Mm-hmm.
pretty good sense of the lay of the land. Um, I think there's a few things. How people do business does shift a bit depending on the geo. So, like as an example, if you think about this is like way too much event details, but if you think about how an event is run and where you invest, like we over invest on cuisine for Asia because that really matters from and there it's not one homogenous culture, but in general, that is something that part of the world really prioritizes is the
Mm-hmm.
food. So we always want good food, don't get me wrong, but like
Mm-hmm.
the experience of the food and how that happens, we really focus on that there and trying to make business connections around that.
Mm-hmm.
Other interesting things. So podcasts, okay? Podcasts are very, very big in the US and they're very big in Europe. Not so big in Asia, not so big in Middle East. So this formatting is not as popular there. So does that does that allow us to be some of the pioneers to bring that there so that all of a sudden people get really comfortable and excited about doing that? Or do we say we need to shift how we're interacting with people for this region in a way that is relevant to them now? So those are the type of things that we start thinking about. Um, and then also even just like how people take in content in general.
Mm-hmm.
So like do they like to have a presentation where someone is talking at them as a very like scripted thing? In certain parts of the world that's very normal and people are super engaged and looking very closely. In other parts of the world, like they're going to shut off and they need something that like that has a bit more action, like so
Yeah.
all that stuff we think about, which is why it's so important that we have local experts who know that region and do what's best for that region. But yeah, the startup scene in the Middle East is crazy. We have a whole section for it at our show there in September. We have a whole section for investors, and there's just it's really interesting to see how that works. But the reality is, there's parts that are going to be the same wherever you go, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
parts that we really have to think about to make it most applicable for that geo. So as an example, the Europe show, it's also the venue that we have, which is ridiculous in a good way. But you have this pond, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
lake, whatever you want to call it, where people are out there taking meetings on pedlos. Like, and they
Yeah.
love it, but that's kind of like very European. Okay, I
Yeah,
can
yeah, yeah.
half
You,
Europe.
you cannot export it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Even if we made a fake lake, that the Americans would be taking their meetings there. They'd be like, "That's not a
Probably not. Yeah.
I've got my time. Let's go." I don't want to
Yeah.
sit bask in the sun right now. I'm here to get business done. So
Yeah.
it is stuff like that that we really think about and how different areas of the world react and respond to things because there's really a human level at the bottom of all of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that one. And we didn't even talk about the post-event parties that I think are one of the most interesting thing to export in the Middle East, but we will not talk about it. Okay, Scarlett, it has been a pleasure to speak with you. It was very, very interesting, and I'm really looking forward for the next events because yeah, they're going to be very interesting. So thank you very much for joining. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you. I loved it. It was a great conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.